Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. And this week's deep dive is actually going to be on voting and why I think the 2024 US presidential election is actually going to be secure. And if you're a longtime listener and follower of mine, you know that I try to play it straight down the middle. I do not care what your politics are. I want to talk objectively about the good, the bad, and the ugly here. And given my decades of cybersecurity experience, as well as consulting with politicians, campaigns, also looking at voting regularities myself. I even sat through Mike Lindell's the My Pillow Guys Cyber Symposium, tweeting the whole thing out, writing articles on this. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think it's important that we talk about everything. So let's start by ripping the band-aids off and start with the bad and the ugly, because quite frankly, no system is perfect, and there are some issues when it comes to essentially voting in the United States, and I want to get through that first. And so by virtue of that, we're going to start basically with an article that was written by Sky Jacobs in TechSpot, because I thought she had a really good write-up on essentially a lot of these issues that we're seeing, but I do have a lot of thoughts on what was laid out here. And so with that, let's dive in, because Jason Parker, who is a software developer, and he's recently turned security researcher, and by recently I mean years, basically has for the past year been hunting down and reporting critical vulnerabilities in commercial platforms used by courts, government agencies, and police departments across the United States. And his efforts have turned up some rather startling and I would say alarming results, as Sky Jacobs said as well, finding that 19 of these systems have a lot of vulnerabilities which would allow an attacker to access confidential information, manipulate legal documents, and compromise personal data as well. This also opens the door for attackers to falsify registration databases, and obviously that's not a good thing. And to quote Mr. Parker, these vulnerabilities in a voter registration portal, much like those found in court systems, underscores how inadequate security measures can put citizens' rights and personal information at risk. Now, the vulnerabilities basically have two core issues in common. First, the system's permission controls are not strong enough, meaning you might be able to work around the permissions and gain access to this database. Second, user inputs are not properly checked as well. And so many websites use easy-to-guess ID numbers. Some let users change important fields. They can also grant users access beyond what they're authorized to have. And as a result, attackers can gain high-level access into these systems without going through proper authorization checks. So, for example, in the state of Georgia, a flaw in the voter registration cancellation portal could allow attackers to submit cancellation requests using only basic personal information like names and birth dates. In the Granicus GovG QA platform used by government agencies, attackers could reset passwords and gain access to usernames and emails by manipulating web addresses. Now, this level of control could also allow basically threat actors to hijack accounts or change ownership of sensitive public records as well. Now, similarly, a vulnerability in the Thomson Reuters CTRAC e-filing system could also allow attackers to elevate their statuses basically to court administration by manipulating fields during that registration process. Sounds like they've got a problem with injection attacks. Now, this could potentially grant access to view or tamper with sensitive court data as well. Court record platforms in several Florida counties, including Sarasota and Hillsborough, have weak access controls that allow unauthorized access to restricted documents, and among the compromised records were sealed documents, mental health evaluations, and witness lists. Never good. That's private information, obviously, that should be securely protected, according to basically everybody, including Parker, who found these things. Now, in Arizona's Maricopa County, the Superior Court e-filing system allowed exploitation of API endpoints to retrieve restricted legal documents. The Catalyst Easy filing platforms used in multiple states expose personal information and even sealed court documents in some cases. In short, and I quote, the vulnerabilities discovered in these platforms reveal systemic security failures that span regions and vendors, end quote. Again, according to Jason Parker, who's finding these things, and I would agree with that statement. I would also agree with his statement when he says these platforms are supposed to ensure transparency and fairness, but are failing at the most fundamental level of cybersecurity. Now, obviously, Parker has no illusions that these issues are going to be easy to fix. They are rather legion. So the solution is going to be nothing short of a complete overhaul of how security is handled in both court and public record systems. Robust permission controls must be immediately implemented, stricter validation of user inputs enforced, regular security audits and penetration testing should be standard for every organization, business, personal, government, whatever it is, and obviously not an afterthought. Other remedies he mentions are things like familiar terrain. So this is familiar terrain to any security expert, and that's really the thing, because many local governments don't have people like me or people like Jason Parker. And so by virtue of it, they're just not aware of these things. And there are plenty of well-meaning IT people out there that will focus on the data security side of things, but they're not penetration testers. They don't have this level of requisite knowledge. And cybersecurity trains differently than what you think of as traditional IT. But most people outside of the field just think, oh, the IT guy or gal can just fix absolutely everything and secures properly, when, I don't go to my podiatrist for brain surgery, and I don't go to my neurosurgeon for footwork. I like to walk and think, and those two specialize. So the widespread adoption of multi-factor authentication obviously would help with that ongoing training of IT personnel and updating everything with patches, all that kind of stuff. And so unless basically these organizations act quickly, quote, the consequences could be devastating, not just for the institutions themselves, but for the individuals whose privacy they are sworn to protect. And so, unfortunately, the responses that Parker got was pretty mixed. Some were quickly remediated, some dragged their feet, some didn't respond. Lee County in Florida threatened him with legal action. And so, this is all bad. There's no doubt of that. I completely agree that is a huge thing. I'm a privacy advocate. I think this is absolutely inexcusable to have government systems with sensitive data, our personal data in it, that is this vulnerable. But I also think it's important to note a couple of items here, and as it directly relates to voting malfeasance and possible fraud. And I think this is the crux of the situation, as we see basically accusations of voter fraud, et cetera, et cetera. None of this actually relates to the voting machines themselves. Those voting machines tend to be overwhelmingly offline. Basically across counties, precincts, districts, they're offline from the internet and would require physical tampering to get in to basically actually change votes on the machine. So if you wanted to swing the vote for Biden, for Harris or Trump or whoever you're planning on voting for, you would need physical access, as you can't just simply route into these across the internet from Russia or wherever and simply hack into them. On top of this, updates to voting machines from manufacturers have been reviewed and dissected heavily to ensure that a SolarWinds type infection isn't present that could tamper with voting totals. And this is especially true in the wake of the 2020 election here, where we saw a lot of accusations. Now, on top of this, let's assume for a moment that somebody did poison the voter rolls, for example, and added in 1,000 people that could all vote for one candidate. So let's say somebody that is pro-Trump or Harris or whoever decides to go in and say, I'm going to add 1,000 people to this county, all of which will vote for Harris or Trump or whomever. Then those 1,000 people would have to show up to the polls to do it. The manpower job that, let's say, a foreign intelligence agency would have to leverage would be absolutely enormous. And we have never seen that attempt in more than a decade of using electronic voting machines of this nature while having online voter registration, primarily because we have a system of checks in the voting system itself, even if most states aren't initially taking like an ID. Election officials in most jurisdictions are trained to check basically up on voters without actually needing that ID. So as an example, I early voted this year given my travel schedule, and I walked in to do it. I didn't mail it in. I walked into the polling place in my county. And so when I was basically there, I was asked to give my full name, my address, which, okay, anybody can get online, but when I signed the voter roll, they handed me a ballot and then checked my signature first. That signature would never be online, and it is unique to me. And they literally looked at it and mirrored it. So now let's assume for a moment that I could fake all of this, and let's say the Russians or whoever actually decided to send an army of fake voters to a swing state where, let's say, I hacked the voter registration system. Yet there's another check on this, which is the voter rolls that are compiled outside of the voter registration database, actively using the election to ensure that doesn't happen as well. That's why people during the 2020 election were getting it wrong when they said there were way more people in Pennsylvania, for example, voting than were actually registered. This is a disparate check that ensures the rolls are accurate and people can't just show up, basically on one without being checked against the other. And so these are the discrepancies that we'd be looking for if a whole bunch of, Pavels decided to show up in a county and vote for whomever. Now, there's an actual aftermath of the 2020 election as well, where widespread claim was fraud. It simply wasn't found. And consider the following here. And again, I don't care who you voted for. This is simply the facts on the ground. Even the partisan group that was hired on behalf of Donald Trump could not find this. The Cyber Ninja outfit went to Arizona and recounted Maricopa and some others, and their report was we couldn't find fraud either, and they had every reason to find fraud. They were literally hired out of partisan nature to do that. Now, I also literally sat through, as I mentioned, the MyPillow Guys Cyber Symposium. I have tweets and a written article to prove that I was there through literally the entire thing. They couldn't prove it either. And studies going back decades haven't been able to find any widespread malfeasance either. George W. Bush administration during that time had one of these studies where they looked at millions of votes and could find almost no fraud whatsoever, or accidental, like, oh, I have the same name as my father, so I vote as my father votes as me, that kind of stuff. But there was no widespread fraud, and we just haven't seen it as it's played out. So what I'm saying is simply this. Everything that Jason Parker found, and it was reported by TechSpot, is super important to fix and secure. I completely agree. There's no doubt of that. But what I'm saying here is that we have a data privacy problem with our information as it's being put into government systems, but we do not have a hack the voting machines or manipulating the system unchecked problem here due to everything that I just mentioned. Now, as I said, basically during the MyPillow Cyber Symposium, what we saw were an absolute ton of demonstrations. Oh, here's how you would hack a voting machine. Here's how you would manipulate this or that, or here's a demonstration on the mathematics behind it. Demonstrations are great, but that doesn't mean the system itself was actually hacked. So, for example, I can teach you how to rob a bank. That doesn't mean the bank was robbed. I can leave my car doors unlocked all night long outside, but that doesn't mean somebody opened my car door, let alone stole my radio. And so finally, what I'm most basically worried about here regarding voter integrity is actually disinformation. People living in an ecosystem of demonstrably false information that could push them to one candidate or the other. That's not a Trump or Harris thing. We are seeing disinformation fly all over the place. That's one of the things that we do here at my company. This is basically an election issue around the entire world, and we have seen this disinformation travel across Europe and other countries in Asia as well. And so this is the problem that we have. And I think if we are really being honest with ourselves and looking at it, that is going to be the big thing. So I do think that essentially, given all the issues with online government systems that are not directly affecting the voting machines, because again, they are offline, our issue here, I think, is going to be disinformation. That's not secure. I think the voting systems are, even if there are vulnerabilities. Because again, I can teach you how to rob a bank. It doesn't mean the bank was robbed. And so I'll leave you with that. Looking forward to both the love and the hate I'm going to get online for this one in responses to the radio show. So here we are. Good luck to us all in November. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.